harmful sexual behavior is that it actually is against sex. It is not that we want too much sex, it is that we want too much anti-sexual behavior. We know the beauty and power of sex, but we also know when we are pursuing a deviant imitation of a beautiful erotic life. It is not possible to become too sexual for God. What? Gotta admit, there are many times when I'm reading stuff in this book that I'm like, that's a sentence I never thought I'd read. That's a sentence I never thought I'd say out loud. Now that we've taken a look at some of the things that can cause unwanted sexual behavior, let's take a look now at some of the suggestions Jay Stringer offers so that we can get past that unwanted sexual behavior and find true healing. So if I were to summarize his points, the main things that help us get out of unwanted sexual behavior is to seek out connection with other people and also to find personal healing and take care of the stuff that is within our own control. The point is to learn to care for yourself in such a way that helps you be ready to care for others. That's a big problem that he mentions in the book, that people who struggle with like pornography addiction or prostitution or stuff like that, they have a hard time being there emotionally for the people around them because it is just kind of so consuming and it takes up so much of their energy and brain power, thinking and worrying about their shame and their behaviors. So the point is to be able to get to the point where you can care for yourself, do proactive things, seek out healing, so that the relationships around you can also be rich and fulfilling, and that overall your desire to do the behaviors that are acting out diminishes. So we're going to zoom in and take a look at repairing your relationship with yourself and then repairing your relationships with others. So a big part of that is disarming the power of shame. And here's what Jay says. The more you feel shame, the more you pursue pornography. It might sound obvious that shame drives pornography use, but the sheer numbers may alarm you. Men in my sample were nearly 300 times more likely to pursue pornography for each unit of shame they felt about their behavior, and women were 546 times more likely. It has to be said, shame, not pleasure, drives pornography use. Yeah, isn't that astounding that shame is the driver for pornography use? And not lust, not sexual desire. It's shame itself. And that makes sense why facing the shame is so important. So to continue, one of the most enjoyable stories I've read in recent years came from an interview with Andy Casagrande, the cameraman of Discovery Channel's notorious show Shark Week. Casagrande was asked what in the world he is supposed to do when a great white shark is swimming right at him. He answered that he must do something counterintuitive: swim directly at the shark with the camera. This action seems to trigger a defense mechanism in the shark. Now they're like, wait a second, everything in the ocean swims away from me. The reality is that if you don't act like prey, they won't treat you like prey. Casagrande's statement has a lot to teach us about disarming the power of shame. We should face it. The experience of shame is the biggest predator in our lives, and attempting to outmaneuver our great white memories come naturally to most of us. We swim away from shame each time we downplay the significance of pain, embrace theologies that make amnesia or easy forgiveness of past harm virtuous, and pursue addictive behavior in which we punish our bodies 1,000 times over for the cruelty originally committed against us. Herein lies the problem. Shame's power is so often derived from our flight from it. The more we run, the more it pursues us. To turn toward healing means we set our eyes upon the shark of shame, defying it, disarming it, and demonstrating that it must submit to the paradoxical power of vulnerability. The more we swim in the direction of shame, the more we recognize that our current struggles are often smokescreens, distracting us from the presence of more threatening experiences of it. You may have picked up this book in an attempt to solve a pornography issue, but quickly learned that there was more swimming beneath the surface. Shame is certainly a terrifying beast, but each time we choose not to live as its prey, we find it less powerful than we imagined. Like, look, I know that I haven't dealt with pornography, and that's not me at all being like bragging or boastful. We all have our own issues to deal with, and they all suck. So, even though that's not something that I've had to deal with, my own problems, staring down the shame, like, wow, it is powerful. I have never felt more like a warrior in my life than when I've faced down shame. And and it's incredibly healing. Like my relationship with myself is super prepared when I come to my rescue and say, no, I'm not going to run anymore. I've got to face whatever is making me feel ashamed of myself. And I've got to then offer myself compassion. All of which for me is an extension of how God is already offering me courage and grace and compassion. So it's easy for me to like ride his coattails and then apply it to myself. But even if you don't believe in God or have a relationship with God, I still think that he can give you help to face those sharks, man. Face those sharks. Ooh, I forgot about this part. To carry on, the action of facing our shame echoes something God instructed the people of Israel to do when poisonous snakes threatened their civilization. Civilization. Why is that so hard to say? Civilization. In the unpredictable wilderness, the Israelites were homeless, and they were receiving airdropped rations of food. Terrified of dying and detesting their narrow choices in food and housing, the Israelites began to do what came naturally. They spoke against Moses and God for delivering them into this mess. God's response was to escalate the direness of their situation. The Lord sent poisonous snakes to bite the people of Israel. Corpses of poisoned bodies piled up, and once again the people were distraught. In their horror and helplessness, they recognized that their complaining and slanderous speech about their leaders may have led to their current state of affairs. Moses heard Israel's remorse and petitioned God to heal the people. God's remedy was simple and almost comical. He had them fashion a bronze snake, plop it on a pole, and have the poisoned Israelites look at it. The story is fairly translucent. The story is fairly translucent in its allegory. The Hebrews must look at the very thing that is killing them. And boy howdy, yeah, what a fantastic example. I can't really add on to that. I find it very powerful that the point of doing healing, the point of facing shame, is so that you can be strong enough to embrace joy. And like, who would have thought that is something that you would have to practice and become strong enough for? But I can just like witness receiving joy has been the biggest struggle I've faced. It was actually way easier to just continue believing that I was unwanted and undesirable and that I would always be broken. So much easier than facing the prospect that I could be loved exactly the way that I had always hoped I could be loved, accepted completely, that people could enjoy the things about me that I don't even enjoy. So it was way harder believing that those good things existed and they existed for me. So for me, facing shame is helping me be strong enough to accept joy, which is a large part of what he gets at when he's talking about in his book about healing and healing your relationship with yourself. So there are 3 things within the category of helping heal your relationship with yourself that he brings up. The first one is choosing personal integrity. The second is preparing for the pitfalls, for your temptations, essentially. And then the third is incorporating things that delight you in your daily, weekly, and monthly schedule. He calls it a daily delight, and I really like that. I like alliterations. I'm a sucker for them. So the way that he puts this whole path of choosing personal integrity, just really well said. I mean, this is a book review, so I might as well just say it the way that he says it. If the word integrity is a hurdle for you, let's explore an alternative meaning. Integrity is not about fleeing or burying sexual desire. It is concerned with being unified and honest in pursuing the holistic desires within you. Many people I meet truly long for beauty, wholeness, and creativity in their lives. They also know that these dimensions of life require intentional, interactive work. When we encounter adversity, we are prone to compromise the holy longings burgeoning within us. This pull toward compromised desire is at the core of our struggles with integrity. A failure of integrity does not begin when we look at porn. It begins the moment we begin to care less about the things that matter. And, woof. The moment we begin to care less about the things that matter. I spent many years running from wanting to write music, so I was not actually having personal integrity because I wouldn't follow through on the things that I loved. And now that I do, I'm super happy about that. Super excited. Glad that I do it. I feel more whole and more like me than I ever did before. So, amen and hallelujah, Jay. The second part, anticipating your struggles. That's not to like add shame to the fire. It's just acknowledging the fact that you have some weaknesses and some patterns and some places where you regularly slip up, and just preparing for that eventuality. One of the places that I worked, we talked about prepentance. So instead of failing and then choosing to change and asking for forgiveness later, you anticipate knowing that this is a weakness that I have. So I want to put good things in my path so that the likelihood of me failing in this way is reduced. And that's not to rag on repentance. Like, being able to recover from failure is a very vital skill, and it's very enriching to my life personally. And it's also enriching to admit and divert some of the energy into just like planning for my weaknesses and try to find a way to alleviate some of that strain. A stupid example of this is how I am a horrible morning person, absolutely horrible morning person. And if I ever have a chance of going to the gym before I go to work, it is only because nighttime Dara had the foresight to pack my bag, to meal prep, to get all of my clothes picked out for the next day so that when I rolled out of bed in the morning, I just had to grab things and go. And that is kind of what anticipating your struggles are. I know morning Dara does not think through everything that she needs to think through. So I let nighttime Dara take care of morning time Dara. You know what I mean? Hopefully that makes sense. But if it doesn't, at least maybe what Jay says is a little bit more hitting home. So he talks about one of my clients, Stanley, recognized that his extensive travel schedule needed to be transformed. He noticed he was taking far more business trips than he actually needed to. Traveling was like a vacation to me, particularly because of how awful my marriage felt. I needed to have the integrity to address my marriage rather than run from it. Clients like Stanley recognize that many of their patterns of escape can be transformed by anticipating what they want to experience in place of entitlement and shame. A year into treatment, it occurred to Stanley that he could ask his assistant to book him at bed and breakfasts whenever possible. A home brought him comfort, a reminder of his grandparents, but a hotel triggered him to feel out of control. He also pursued marriage therapy because he knew that if he did not turn to face his marriage, his sexual behavior would consistently entice him to turn away from it. Stanley's integrity to anticipate his struggles shows us an essential task: to look at the context of our most entitled behavior and scheme for ways to bring delight and transformation instead. In other words, we should not just say no, but scheme for ways to bring our bodies pleasure in non-orgasmic ways. Okay, so this last element, this part of like the healing your relationship with yourself, was the aspect of a daily delight, which I think that was the most transformative part of this for me, because I didn't realize how much I was holding things that I loved hostage from me until I could like correct certain behaviors. Whereas incorporating the things that I loved is actually what has healed me and helped me remember that I have things to live for. And I think that's the point. It's not just about getting rid of bad desires. It's about replacing those bad desires with good ones. So an example for me is I have always enjoyed getting massages, but they are expensive, and so I haven't always indulged that desire to have a massage, even though I may be walking around with one shoulder higher than the other and a huge set of massive knots in my neck. So after reading this book, it gave me a good reason to say, like, okay, I should just budget to have a massage once every other month, because I not only need it for my body, but I need it for my mental health and for me. And it's been so awesome. I look forward to it. I put it on my calendar as soon as I've got it all planned out, and it gives me a sense of anticipation and helps me in those moments when I'm at work or I feel like my life is particularly lackluster or meaningless, to see that, but there's something that I love that's coming ahead, that's coming next. Same thing for me with songwriting. I have a day set aside every week where after work I spend time, just barricade myself in my room and I write music. Sometimes I don't look forward to it because it's difficult work, but it is something for me to look forward to every week, to know that like I'm not just a has-been musician. I am a current musician. And then, like, for me, daily things that bring me delight is having a real conversation with somebody around me, or a real conversation with God, where I don't hold back or say just the things that I'm supposed to. As long as I have a moment of connection with someone, even if it's just for a few minutes, that's like what gives me delight. And it gives me power to keep going. So speaking of repentance, like I mentioned a moment ago, this was just such a fantastic section. I just got to read it. The joy of repentance is found in turning from entitlement to the pursuit of what we truly desire. Entitlement is an attitude that we have an inherent right to get what we are deprived of. Repentance refocuses us not on what we demand, but on what we deserve. Repentance is faith that God truly desires to give us what is best for us. Bank tellers will say that the best way to discern a counterfeit bill is to spend lots of time handling real money. The same is true with delight. The more you live a life of holistic integrity with your desire, the less appealing that behavior promising release, but concluding in judgment, will become. Fantastic, right? Haven't heard it put quite so well as Jay has put it. Who knew? I promise you, I'm trying to strike that balance of not rushing, but also not making this video too long. I'm trying to do my best. So in this last part, that's all about how to heal relationships with others. There's some just utterly fantastic things that he says that I'm mostly going to read what he says. I might give a little bit of exposition, but largely, let's just let Jay talk. So there are three things. First is the tension between being attuned to someone else's needs, but also having boundaries. The second is conflict resolution. And then the third is pursuing strength and vulnerability at the same time. So let's take a look first at attunement, and he calls it containment, which is like boundary setting. In Dan Allender's book, How Children Raise Parents, he noted that every child is asking at least two core questions. Number one, am I loved? And number two, can I get my own way? As adults, we continue to ask very similar questions. The role of attunement in relationship is to tell others, yes, you are loved. And the role of containment is to mature us by letting others know, you will not always get what you want from me. I have my own limits, needs, and observations too. Attunement's primary task is to recognize the face and story of the person in front of you with kindness and curiosity. The chief task of containment involves creating boundaries. So here's an example. A bid to have sex with your spouse could be met with a no, or it's just too late. Here, attunement is needed not only for your spouse, but also for yourself. The internal dialogue might sound something like, I was really hoping for intimacy with my wife, but she is clearly exhausted. My desire for sex is good, which is self-attunement, and instead of going to porn after she goes to bed, I can unwind with her and invite her to share more with me about the most exhausting elements of her day, which is self-containment and others-centered attunement. In the morning, I will re-engage the conversation around sexual intimacy and find a time that works best to be with one another. Every relational dilemma we encounter is a place to practice the harmonizing of attunement and containment. And it's okay to get creative with it, by figuring out creative solutions. So, there you go. The second element of practicing conflict and repair in your relationships. Because you have to practice conflict. Like, there's just no way around it. But the way that it's repaired is hugely meaningful. So I apologize if just being read to is not your favorite thing. But this is just too well said. I'm just going to go with it. Imagine a 3-year-old in a coffee shop who had just been told he can only eat one donut. The child's anger escalates after the sugar boundary is enforced. The child falls to the ground crying, and when the dad goes to pick him up, the toddler slaps him. At this point, the dad takes a quick glance around the shop and sees that everyone is staring. Steeped in shame, the dad escalates his intensity and yells at his son for his behavior. He scoops his son up, and they beeline for the family car. Still screaming and kicking his little legs, the boy is placed under further lockdown in his car seat for what is sure to be a maddening ride home. Relatable, right? At this juncture, the scene is full of conflict. Father and son are divided against one another, and both are filled with enmity. Then, what the son needs most is to have the relationship repaired. not further ruptured through punishment, whether physical or psychological, or stonewalling. And an attuned parent is able to reflect about the situation and talk to his 3-year-old about what had happened. The dad may say something like this: "I got very upset with you in the coffee shop and yelled. I'm sure that was very scary to see Daddy's face look so mean. I am so sorry, son. I want to treat you with kindness." The repair begins to start, but the parent must also address the toddler's tantrum after the boy's body is regulated. The father might wait 20 minutes or more to remind his son about the rupture. "I know you were very upset when I said you could have only one. Donuts are so delicious, and I understand why you would want more. It is okay to be mad, but it is not okay to use your strong arms to hit me." During the course of childhood, we undergo thousands of cycles of conflict, like the coffee shop situation, and repair, the conversation at home afterward. This allows children to develop language for what is happening internally and interpersonally. Just as important, it gives them the knowledge that their behavior and emotions, whether angry or sad or anywhere in between, will not result in the termination of relationships. When children are not equipped to turn to healthy relationships for repair, they will eventually look outside their parents or primary caregivers for rescue. As teenagers, this rescue is often a behavior or relationship that offers a hybrid of relief and revenge for what their parents provided. Woof. Conflict alone is not evidence of an unhealthy relationship. Quite the contrary. Those in healthy relationships are able to view conflict as a vital threshold of growth. Rather than blame one another within conflict, healthy individuals seek integrity to address their contribution to the madness before them. This is what I refer to as generative conflict. Messy conflict, on the other hand, occurs when a couple is committed to blaming one another without any reflection on the deeper dynamics at play. In my office, he's a counselor. So, in my office, one scenario I often witness with married couples is that the husband wants to connect sexually, but the wife wants to connect relationally. One spouse may say, "I would be more open to sex if you were more open to conversation," which then tees up this next response from the other spouse: "I would be more open to conversation if you were more open to sex." For many couples, the conversation ends there and mild to extreme conflict ensues. The spouse who doesn't want sex might roll over in bed, irritated by the demand on her body, and her partner rolls out of bed, angry that his desire is so rarely received. Within the next hour or day, the husband will seek out some form of dissociation, often escalating to the use of pornography. The function of pornography gives him the ability to lean on something that simultaneously allows for escape from the present messy conflict and is something that can make his spouse pay. In most marriages, messy conflict serves as a way to bring about an immature form of repair. If the husband is upset, he may increasingly withhold his emotional life. At some level, he knows that his silence will set up his wife to eventually move toward him in an invitation for sex in order to release the marital tension. As you can see, this is an example of immature repair. Sadly, immature surrogate repair is the most common type I see in my counseling practice. If the wife does not offer to relieve the conflict, the couple will often continue to be on edge with one another. Or, if messy conflict occurs for years on end, the couple will get into a battle over who wants sex and intimacy the least. This is like too true for so many couples I see. In this marital scenario we just explored, conflict is not being used to grow the couple into healthy human beings. Instead, messy conflict is used to maintain the status quo of the sexual relationship. Rarely will the couple acknowledge that the partner who has the least desire for sex may be the healthiest. After all, why would anyone truly desire sex when the symbolic meaning is to bring catharsis to messy conflict? Instead, the one who wants more sex is seen as healthy, despite desiring a form of sex that is filled with entitlement. For a couple to transition from messy to generative conflict and from immature to mature repair, they individually need the ability to be honest about their hostility toward one another and explore the dimensions of their own integrity that have been forfeited. In the example above, the husband will need the honesty to engage how much easier it's been to blame his wife's lack of desire for sex than to address how his sexual entitlement erodes intimacy. The wife will need the honesty to share how she allowed the meaning of sex to be about the release of tension, because the cost of her desire to be deeply and holistically known would have been too much to bear. So, An important note when it comes to relieving conflict, especially in a relationship where there has been already a fair amount of emotional damage with unwanted sexual behaviors, it's important, at least according to Jay, it's important to have the person who is engaging in those behaviors go and seek out somebody to talk to, whether it be a therapist or a trusted friend or a counselor, to disclose what's going on with them before they go to their significant other, if it's possible, like if it hasn't been found out, and then to allow a time for healing for the person who's been hurt. So here's something really important about addressing deceit or blame. Next to the agony of betrayal, the second dynamic that creates the most anger for betrayed spouses is that they were led to believe they were the problematic ones in the relationships. During the course of addressing your problematic sexual behavior in the context of your marriage, your therapist may encourage you to write a letter of amends to your spouse. This will include a confession of the times you lied to your spouse, make her feel as though she were crazy one, deceived her into thinking that your behavior happened only one time, or blamed her for either not being sexual enough or letting herself go. And this can be true for guys and girls, He says her, but we know it's neutral. Before any level of forgiveness can take place, you and your spouse must have the full scope of what must be forgiven. This season of repair could take months or years for your spouse or family and friends to navigate. Therefore, you must prepare for how you will interact with your desire for sex or intimacy when your spouse needs a season of emotional and sexual separation to address the harm you brought to the relationship. For many men, this can often instigate another season of pornography dependence. The way to prevent this relapse is to ask others, like a therapist, a friend, a pastor, for help with the complexity and stress you are facing. Community strengthens us in ways we could never be able to conceive in our secrecy. Additionally, around the time of disclosure to spouses, many will choose to commence 60 to 90 days of sexual abstinence. Suffering the pain you introduce to your partner's life, while simultaneously learning how to understand and regulate your emotional life without sex, is one of the most powerful combinations of change you will undergo in this process of repair. I just figured that would be good to note and good to hear. For anybody out there who may watch this, there you go.
Strength is my weakness. Hey, quick question. How is strength my weakness? I hate this game.
Okay, and so the third thing that he talks about is pursuing strength and vulnerability at the same time, which makes me think of, for any Bones fans out there, about the conversation that Bones has with Booth as they've discovered, and talked through the fact that they both have feelings for each other. But she says she's not ready for a relationship yet because she's trying to figure out the difference between being strong and being impervious.
I'm improving.
Improving?
Yes, I'm quite strong.
Yeah, well, you've always been strong.
You know the difference between strength and imperviousness, right?
Well, now that you're gonna get all scientific on me.
Well, a substance that is impervious to damage doesn't need to be strong. When you and I met, I was an impervious substance. Now I am a strong substance.
To be strong is to be resilient to the difficulties and to be able to come back for more. Whereas being impervious means you've never let yourself be hurt before. And so she recognizes that her behavior has been impervious, that she's never let people get close to her so that she could be hurt. And now she's learning how to be strong, which is to be able to get back up when she is hurt. It's awesome. And I think that's a really good analogy for what he talks about in this final section about how our relationships, we need to pursue strength and to have the resiliency to keep coming back, while also being honest and vulnerable with them, appropriately so. So I've got 2 sections for you on this one. In the Hebrew scriptures, the God of the universe is depicted as strength and vulnerability in perfect union. He is the powerful creator, unmatched in his strength. Some Middle Eastern traditions might have gods of the sun, moon, or stars, but the Jewish God is the creator of the sun, moon, and stars. At the same time, though, this God is not unaffected by human struggle. To the contrary, He is constantly taking up residence in the situations of vulnerability that his people face. Other gods are believed to create human beings because they are lazy and want their created beings to do the hard work. In the Hebrew worldview, however, God's hands are in the dirt, forming life and inviting his creation into joyful co-participation in the world. When God's strength is present, creation flourishes. His strength does not dominate others, it serves them. God pursues the weary, increases the power of the weak, and equips others to co-create the kingdom of heaven alongside him. God's vulnerability is equally remarkable. His vulnerability takes on the very illness and sin that have contaminated the human condition. At the climax of the Gospels, we see the power and vulnerability of God intertwined. His ultimate strength rises out of his ultimate defeat, resurrection from the grave. Gah! This guy is so eloquent! Okay, so here's an example of vulnerability and strength being enacted. Earlier I alluded to a story of somebody who had experienced sexual abuse from their uncle in a tent. It's this person. And so it's talking about how this person figured out how to be strong and vulnerable. So his name's Clayton. Clayton's depressive fog lifted when he determined that he was going to reverse the crippling script of silence that marked his life. His passion extended outside his personal healing, and he wondered if his friends might also need to heal. He presumed they were living unreflectively in a male culture that ignores the reality of male sexual abuse and disguises male violence against women as innocent fantasies that are not hurting anyone. Clayton, who was abused by his uncle in the tent at his family reunion, experienced increased difficulty knowing how to relate to his friends as therapy progressed. He wanted to share his story with friends, but he was scared about how it might be received. Men talk about sex all the time, but rarely about how much difficulty it brings into our lives. He wanted vulnerability, but did not believe that his friends would be able to connect to his story of abuse. 1 year into therapy, Clayton was experiencing depression and found himself intoxicated at a friend's holiday party. His friend observed his unusual binge drinking and invited him to the front porch to check in. Clayton made a rash decision to vent everything. I'm a miserable man. I'm a sex addict. I was abused by my uncle. I'm a perpetrator and a victim. No woman will ever want me. He left the party 5 minutes later, feeling exposed and ashamed. As you can see, Clayton is struggling to allow vulnerability to form the basis of his relationships. Clayton, too, believed he needed to protect himself from others, learning his story, setting him up instead to carelessly vent the most vulnerable details of his life, not in vulnerability, but in desperation. When he did purge his story, he was drunk, sabotaging his ability to receive the care he deserved. What Clayton needed to learn, and what a lot of us need to learn, is that vulnerability does not guarantee a change to our external situations, but it provides pathways for others to offer us empathy. And that was the difficulty with Clayton. He was venting, he was not actually being vulnerable. And to be vulnerable is to have the relationship be strong enough to handle the weight of what you tell them, and you being strong enough to accept that somebody else would want to offer you empathy instead of just believing that you are nothing and worthless and all that jazz. Here's an example of what true strength looks like in here. Melissa sought out therapy because she felt used throughout her life. Her employer owed her thousands of dollars in unpaid overtime. Her spouse recently got a dog for her daughter, despite knowing she was allergic. In the same season, Melissa's brother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She didn't know what to do, so she chose not to talk to or see him for months. In addition, Melissa's marriage had been slowly eroding for 3 years and went into a downward spiral after her husband found her pursuing a same-sex romantic interest with an old sorority friend from college and saw her TV viewing history, which included pornography. As you can see, Melissa's circumstances were making known the difficulty she had in practicing strength. As a result, her dignity at work suffered. She felt too stuck to pursue the welfare of her brother, and she consistently struggled in bringing her needs to an emotionally calloused husband. The fantasies within unwanted sexual behavior often reveal our inability to find what we want and need in reality. Melissa could pursue what she wanted, but only in a world without any forms of relational resistance. Both Melissa and Austin's not part of Melissa's story, have distorted the purpose and efficacy of strength. Melissa struggles with the other counterfeit version of strength, Abdication of power. When strength is distorted through anger or abdication, relationships suffer. Melissa asked her husband for a date on Saturday and told him about her hurt over his getting a dog against her wishes. She told him, "That dog, as much as we love him, needs to go." The same weekend, they found a new home for the animal. Melissa also raised the issue of compensation with her employer with the subtle indication that she knew a good lawyer. A payment plan was quickly worked out. With the extra money, Melissa purchased a plane ticket to visit her brother. In choosing strength, she found that strength compounded in interest, allowing her to shed tears over her brother's disease. She deeply apologized for how she hid in their relationship. After a year of intentionally practicing strength, she said it had been the most restful year she had ever had as an adult. So you can see that for Melissa especially, being strong allowed her to be vulnerable in the right moments and to feel more deeply. Whereas so often if we just abdicate and say, I don't care about what's going on in my life, it's not a big deal, it doesn't matter, even though we may feel that it does matter, when we abdicate, we're pushing that aside and numbing it and saying, you know what, that's not important, it's not a big deal, I should just get over it. And that's not allowing you to be vulnerable either. So both are necessary. You have to have the strength to be vulnerable and to also recognize when it's appropriate to be vulnerable and when it's more appropriate to hold on to it and work on it a little bit more on your own. So you have to be able to recognize when somebody else is ready to receive your vulnerability. So when I was a teenager and a young adult and even a not so young adult, I guess, it was way easier for me to choose to be impervious. That was kind of my byline. I didn't keep relationships very well because I didn't want to feel, and I was afraid of being betrayed, getting close to someone and being betrayed. So it was easier for me to build up a wall and to run from people when things got too intense. And that was being impervious. I will not allow you to hurt me. Whereas as I've been able to figure out and work through some of the difficulties that led to me wanting to behave imperviously, I have gotten so much stronger. I allow myself to be hurt, which I wouldn't before. And yet I have found that being hurt isn't the end of everything. And in fact, that being loved, golly, is the greatest feeling in the world. Everything in life changes when you feel like you have a really solid bond with people who love you and who love you no matter what. So I was just doing myself a huge disservice by not allowing other people to care about me. And it's odd to think that I had to learn how to be open to hurt and strong enough to be able to handle the hurt so that I could experience joy. But that's precisely how it's happened for me. So that's why I wanted to share the story of Melissa with you so that you can see how often it's easier to just stop caring, but it's not fulfilling at all. So I wanted to conclude on two last quotes. I know I've quoted so many things and so many times in this video, but that was kind of the point. I wanted to give you some really solid excerpts of what is talked about in this book, because if you feel yourself drawn to reading it, good golly, I think it can be life-changing. Not for so many people and whatever spectrum they are in their understanding and relationship with sex and sexuality. This is just massively healing for so many people. So to conclude on two last little cherry on top quotes, here we go. A heart with an ounce of kindness for your life story will accomplish so much more for you than a mind filled to the brim with strategies to combat lust. Pretty compelling, right? That the way to begin is to begin with compassion for yourself, which is counterintuitive. And lastly, evil hates the beauty of sex, and because it cannot abolish its existence, it works to corrupt its essence. Evil succeeds every time we think of sex and subsequently feel damaged, ruined, and out of control in lust. It has completed massive research on us and knows we are far more likely to pursue shameful sexual behavior when we are experiencing difficult emotions. It also knows we are far more likely to be at war with our desires than to pursue greater beauty for our sexual stories. We may find ourselves longing for marriage or a better marriage, but disappointment is all that ever seems to pass. In our loneliness and anger, we may not choose the maturity of growth. Instead, we accept the invitation of evil to pursue pornography. Evil seduces us away from personal growth and into an escape that will paradoxically inject us with greater shame. The irony of sinful sexual behavior is that it actually is against sex. It is not that we want too much sex, it is that we want too much anti-sexual behavior. We know the beauty and power of sex, but we also know when we are pursuing a deviant imitation of a beautiful erotic life. It is not possible to become too sexual for God. What? Got to admit, there are many times when I'm reading stuff in this book that I'm like, that's a sentence I never thought I'd read. That's a sentence I never thought I'd say out loud. and yet it feels so true to me. So I hope that this has been helpful for any of you out there, no matter where you are in your relationship with God, with yourself, with other people, with your own sexuality, yada, yada, yada. Because I know it's been helpful for me. So that's why I wanted to share it with you guys. So if this is the kind of thing that you like learning about, you like having book reviews because you're nerdy like I am, then feel free to leave me a comment and let me know if this is the content that you like, or if you'd like to see something else, let me know as well. I'm super open to all. But thank you so much for sticking around and letting me geek out once more about something that I'm super passionate about. I am odd that anybody would listen to something that I have to say, since I'm like a nobody living in Utah. So thank you for making me feel like a somebody. And this is Dara, over and out.